So, well, I'm looking forward to getting into your story. Thank you for taking a minute out today. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
And I'd like to begin our conversation with COVID. 4 years ago, this pandemic, living through a pandemic was quite a thing for all of us, probably one
Mhm.
of the more momentous events of our lifetime. How did you survive that time period and how did it change you?
Well, I was pastoring a church, still am. I'm a pastor of a church, and that's what I
Yeah.
was doing at that time. And so that presented some different challenges. Of course, everybody was challenged for sure, from school kids to teachers to people who work to everybody had a challenge. And I guess the challenge that I face as a pastor of a church is how do you, because a church really is not the building technically, it's the people
Yeah.
and in fellowship with one another and so and in community. So how do you, I guess, we really had to work through how do we maintain community when there's this separation. And so of course we were already doing live streaming of our church service, so we were set up to do that. We didn't have to scramble for that, so that was good.
Yeah.
But that's still not that social connection um, that that I think really healthy, good churches strive for and actually have happening in their church. So, um, but fortunately, we're in Montana and we have a lot less population, so we're not as crowded. We have probably less government overreach or what would I say, regulation,
Yeah.
and so we were really only uh, out, I guess, for about 8 weeks, and then we were back together again. So it seemed short lived, I guess, the separation, but really the effects of COVID, just the way on school kids, on people's attitudes, even how they work, working from home. Um, we saw a change in just people's attitudes, I guess, through that.
Yeah. Yeah, it was a permanent shift for sure. So let's get to the heart and soul of exactly what you do on a daily basis. I'm going to put you in front of a bunch of grade schoolers, third graders. It's career day. And one of the kids is like, "Hey, what do you do for a living?" How do you answer them?
I would say, well, I'm a pastor, which means I lead a church, and a church is a group of people that gather usually on a Sunday, sometimes on Saturdays, or sometimes different days of the week. But uh, a pastor leads a church. A lot of people think he's mainly what he does is preach, and that's what I do.
Yeah.
But I do a lot more than that. Actually, preaching is probably one of the easier parts uh, of what I do, of my job, I guess, for lack of better words. I don't see it as a job, but I guess it is. Um, but really, what I do mostly, I spend most of my hours helping people do life, with a Christian mindset
Yeah.
and through a biblical lens. Is how do we walk this faith walk out? How do we even live life? Because we all have troubles, Christian, non-Christian, or whatever. We have anxiety, we have fear, we have different pressures of life that come in, and uh, and the church really, because Jesus made, he's the one that modeled the church. He would come along hurting people and walk with them and help them get to a place of spiritual health, emotional health, and so that's largely what I do.
I think about it as like a TV meteorologist. They get this short window where they're actually on camera, but there's all this preparation. There's all of these things that need to be read and digested and going out in the public and doing community and involvement, you know? It's
Mhm.
like it's like I think sometimes people think, that's it. You come into a congregation for a couple hours on a Sunday or maybe Saturday and you're gone. But there's a lot on the back end, which is why I was asking that because especially with kids, they just assume things.
Yeah, well, and adults.
Yeah, sure. Yeah,
There's a difference between a chaplain and a pastor. People sometimes look at a pastor as a chaplain. Hey, just come conduct the service and help me in my time of need if there's a death or whatever.
yeah,
And certainly that has its place, but pastors really fill much more a fuller role than that. And
absolutely. Yeah. So what did you want to be when you were in the 3rd grade? What was your dream? Was it always to be in the church?
No, I'm a second career pastor. I didn't become a pastor till I was 40, and
Okay.
that was 23 years ago. I wasn't actually looking to do that. Honestly, didn't want to do that. And I know for some people that's going to sound weird, but I just sensed a call from God. It wasn't an audible voice, but I just this voice in my heart that was so loud, and I knew it wasn't mine. I'm going to say loud. It wasn't again audibly loud. It was just
Yeah.
clear,
Yeah.
wanting me to be a pastor. And so I knew the answer at that time was yes or no, and I answered yes over several days of kind of battling through that. But going back to your question, when I was in third grade, I mean, I wanted to do so many things. I grew up on a farm, which was great. I mean, growing up on a farm mostly was awesome. You know,
Yeah.
riding motorcycles and shooting guns and driving tractors, and so I thought I kind of wanted to farm, which I actually did. I went back to the family farm for a while, but I also wanted to be I wanted to be a DJ and on TV, and I actually ended up doing that. I out of college, I worked in radio and then was a local TV anchorman for the NBC station in Helena, Montana. So
Wow.
in my younger days, I was in broadcast. Yeah.
So my analogy was perfect. I was just kind of trying to pull at something. So I'm curious. The thing about humans is that, and I come from Missouri, so our motto is "Show me state," is that we want this empirical data to go behind everything. And when it comes to spirituality, people have these moments where they're like, "Yes, God exists." What was the first moment for you? Where you really you took your faith to a place where you're like, "I know this is real."
That's a great question. You know, I think I've had probably maybe three or four sort of pivotal moments in
Okay.
my life like that.
Yeah.
Um, Honestly, if I go back to one of my very first memories of being, I don't know, 3.5, 4 years old, I remember my mom talking to me, trying to tell me about God. And I remember just thinking, well, yeah, duh, of course. I mean, because we have this childlike faith, like we just believe there's something bigger than that,
Yeah.
and I just so that I know that's not a huge thing, but I still remember that. Like there's as a little kid, there was just this intuitive sense that, well, of course there's a God.
Yeah.
I think we grow up and get jaded and see things that we think, well, if there was a God, that wouldn't have happened, you
Yeah.
know. And so you see things like that, and that can cause that. And I grew up going to church every Sunday. I grew up in the Lutheran church, and that's we were there every Sunday, and so I heard the stories, but I really didn't make the connection. And honestly, I I I paid attention because I didn't want to go to hell, and and
Right.
that's not, and that's not a good motivate. Well, it's a motivation for sure, but it's not the motivation that God wants us to have.
Yeah.
One of fear.
Yeah.
Um, he wants it to be of trust and love, and so there. Honestly, there's a lot of fear, I guess, as a kid. Um, Hearing that heaven's real and hell's real and real people go there every day. I didn't want to go there, and so I probably spent a lot of years, um, maybe with some subconscious fear about that, but just kind of, then you become a teenager and you do what teenagers do. But when I went to college, I started going to church that my sister went to, and I started hearing things I'd never heard before. They were very biblical, but like, wow, I didn't know that was in the Bible. And there's just kind of an awakening in me. And I
Yeah.
think so, probably 18, 19 years old, uh, there was this, okay, now, all right, I think I'm starting to get it. And I'm not as motivated by fear to follow God now. I'm motivated by trust and love and what I see in the Bible. And then when I was in my late 30s, a call to ministry, that's when it really upped, I
Yeah.
guess.
Yeah.
And but even as a pastor, 9 years after I pastored, so this was the year 2010. I can tell you, it was May of 2010. I had another, I guess, spiritual growth spurt,
Yeah.
and um, and that was a really significant one because I had enough, I guess, foundation that I could really build something on that.
Yeah.
And I went from pastoring a church where it was growing and people would come and people were getting saved and baptized. And it was nice. We had good seats and good music, and people would laugh and cry when I spoke, at the right times. Um, but it just felt like there was something missing. And in 2010, I won't go into the whole story, but God showed me that there's a lot more, for lack of a better word, supernatural power available uh, to the believer through God's power, not our power, but his power working through us. And I know this sounds kind of weird. And if I wouldn't have seen this myself, I wouldn't believe it. But I just started stepping out, praying boldly for people, praying healing. And we saw just crazy, still do, crazy healings. When I say crazy, like 16-year-old girl with did a CAT scan because she was blacking out and she had a cancer spot on her brain by her optic nerve. And we prayed for it and it went away. They did the CAT scan and it's gone. I mean, there's proof that happened.
Yeah.
We do a lot of work in India, and I've been to India 3 times and praying for a guy there with a broken leg, obviously broken. I prayed and it instantly healed. And if you don't believe that, I don't blame you, because honestly, if I hadn't seen it with my own eyes,
Sure.
I wouldn't have believed it. But
Yeah.
I'm telling you, it's real. And there's hundreds of stories like that started happening. And so when you talk about kind of pivotal moments, really that was probably one of the most significant times in my life, going back to 2010, where it's like, okay, this Christian thing isn't just philosophy. It's just not a way of life. It's actually walking in God's power
Yeah.
uh, here on earth. Now we're not in heaven,
Right.
but we're to bring the we're to bring the atmosphere of heaven, the kingdom of heaven, the uh, this the supernatural power. We're called to bring that to our spot on earth.
Yeah.
And so when that started happening, that I guess was probably the most significant time in my life.
I can believe it, and I think it is formative that you were 3 or 4. A lot of people lose their memories. They don't remember things when you're that young, so to have that level of memory. I remember for me, when I was in high school, early high school, I remember being at the skating rink and someone told me about what hell would be like, and they had a metaphor that just absolutely jolted me. I was like, "Oh, no, I don't want that," and it really woke me up, and I got into a lot of a lot of things in high school that really opened my eyes up because I just didn't grow up in any level of spirituality. But I remember when you said that, and now as a grown adult, I'm thinking that's probably not the best way is to jolt someone through fear, but that's kind of the way we have things tailored. Maybe
Yeah.
because maybe that wouldn't happen in India and another culture, but in the American culture, it tends to be kind of a gateway, so to speak.
Well, fear works, and that's the
Yeah.
problem. Government knows it,
Yeah.
industry knows it, different people know it, and if they can't motivate you another way, they'll motivate you through fear, which is unfortunate
Yeah.
because that's a horrible way to live.
Yeah, it certainly is. Who's been a hero for you? Who's been an ultimate inspiration in your life?
Oh wow, that's a great question. Um, well, we were talking. You're from Kansas City, so
Yeah,
I was a Kansas City Chiefs fan, and so they won the Super Bowl when I was young. I don't know, 8 or 9 years old.
yeah,
I think it was Super Bowl II, I think.
uh-huh,
And Jan Stenerud was the kicker.
yeah,
And the reason I picked the Chiefs, well, of course they were in the Super Bowl, but I remember my dad saying Jan Stenerud's from Montana, and I'm from Montana, so like, oh,
okay,
there's a Montana guy, so that's why I'm a Chiefs guy. So early on, even though I'd never met him, I just thought Jan Stenerud, who actually was from Sweden. He was an
yeah,
exchange student in Montana.
yeah,
He wasn't from Montana, but
sure,
so when I think way back, like that was a hero. Um, yeah, I think just family members. I mean, I know my dad was very uh, influential in my life, and you know, probably the unsung hero.
yeah,
Uh, I got really close to a grandmother of mine that I spent a lot of time with. She just lived a mile across the field from us growing up, and I spent so much time. And really, a lot of my worldview was um, formed on what I learned sitting on her lap and
yeah.
being in her house. And
So as a Chiefs fan, if you could go back in time and see one game, what would that game be?
I think it would probably be that when they won the Super Bowl.
Okay.
'Cause I was so young, I don't really remember that much about the game or seeing it, and I haven't rewatched it. I mean, I'm sure I could. I just haven't taken the opportunity, but
Yeah.
yeah,
I think they played that at the old stadium that we had off Brooklyn Avenue in Kansas City.
I
And
think so.
and it's weird because my dad showed me pictures because he was born in, Brooklyn, raised in Long Island, and he wanted to get out of there, and he got stationed at Richards Gower in Kansas City. So he had pictures of going to games, and it was this tiny little thing. And now it's kind of this memorial on the hill above 18th and Vine, which is where the Jazz District and everything was.
Mhm.
And it's like, how did they do it? It's so tiny. It's like it's weird.
Yeah,
So but yeah, I would love if I could go back in time in Kansas City lore, I would love to have seen it in its heyday when there was music and there was the stadium and all of that was just full of life.
and Len Dawson smoking a
Yeah.
cigarette on the
Right.
sideline.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
And I was
yeah.
thinking about Jan Stenerud because I think I've met him at golf tournaments when I was a kid. I used to get autographs all the time. He was one of the first numbers retired for the Chiefs. I think Lenny was
Mhm,
first, and then it was Jan after that.
mhm,
But he was a
mhm.
really cool guy, really upstanding. He did a lot for the community, just a nice guy.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. I'm curious. I know that your faith fuels who you are, but at the end of the day, you're a human being, and you have
Mhm,
to give a lot of yourself. When you talk about part of giving sermons is a part of your job, but a lot of your job is helping people. And that
mhm,
requires you to give a lot of yourself, but you have to hold back for your family and yourself. How do
mhm.
you balance that? How do you keep that gumption every day to do the work that you do?
Yeah, great question. You know, the first few years as a pastor, I didn't do that.
Right.
I was a spiritual ambulance. I thought every time there was a call, I had to go,
Yeah.
and uh, and you can't do that. It's unsustainable. Um, what I've learned, and I learned this from a wise pastor a few years after I became a pastor. He said, "You have to learn to minister out of calling, not out of need." And what he meant by that is we can't we can't fill every need. Now, and this is not just pastors. I want to back up a little bit. The Bible is clear that every believer is supposed to be a minister. Not every believer is called to be a pastor. Pastors are limited. They're called by God, and there's not everybody's a pastor, but every Christian, according to Ephesians 4:11 and 12, is called to minister. So we're all called to help others.
Yeah.
Um, using our faith to help fuel that, and our love, our love of God, and love of God working through us compels us to help others. But the need, when you open your eyes to that, and a lot of people's eyes aren't open to need, but if you pray, God, show me the needs around me, you better watch out, because you're gonna get overwhelmed, and you can't minister to all those needs. But
Yeah.
that's why we have this, the Holy Spirit speaks to us and say, there's your assignment.
Yeah.
See that one? Go there. Go there. And what this pastor said, it kind of hit me weird, but it was true. He says you have to learn to step over the bodies. In other words, it's like triage in a way. It's
Yeah.
like, you can't minister to all the needs. You can't help everybody in need, but you can help some. And so where do you feel God is directing you to help? He'll take somebody else will fill in the gap there, but where's he calling you? Because you can only do so much.
Yeah.
And you have to set some boundaries, and you have to have a healthy view of your downtime. And so that took me some years to figure out.
Sure.
And it's just not relegated to pastors. It really, any human being can get
Absolutely.
overwhelmed uh, with the need out there. But I would just encourage everyone listening and watching that just ask God where He wants you to go to minister to. I'm not saying move or whatever, but just
Sure.
people. He'll highlight people to you,
Hmm.
and sometimes you just have to step over the bodies
Yeah.
and
Yeah. I
go to
totally
where
get it.
you need to go.
Yeah, totally. So of everything that you've done, you've had different career incarnations, and you found your calling, but at the end of the day, what are you the proudest of? What is it that you've done that you're ultimately the proudest of? I know pride can be ugly, but just what is it that really shines the most?
Um, yeah, I guess there's a healthy pride in doing what I'm doing now, and of course there was a real, I guess, social pride when you're a local news anchor and you go uptown and people recognize you, uh, and that was fine, but that's fleeting. I guess the word, and not to change your question, but I think the word that really fits me is fulfillment.
Yeah,
I I've had these other careers that were, I guess, regarded as like good careers, and I enjoyed most of the aspects of it. But really, when it came down to it, I was like, I thought this would be more fulfilling.
yeah,
When you're sitting there doing local news and you're the anchor man, and you're doing all that, and you think, you go home and it's just you're nobody special, and
yeah,
life goes on. You got to pay the rent, and things are going on. It's like I thought this would be more fulfilling.
yeah,
And so being a pastor has been probably one of the it's been one of the more tiring jobs I've had, but by far the most fulfilling. And I think that's fulfillment is really a key. And sometimes I think we look for fulfillment in different things, and when it's not there, we just think that there is no such thing as fulfillment. But
yeah.
uh,
It's interesting because that really is the way life is. Sometimes it takes a while to find your voice, to find what you're supposed to be here for. And that's why it almost is a fallacy sometimes to ask the senior in high school, what are you going to do for the rest of your life? I mean,
yes,
you know
yeah,
what I'm saying? So think
yep,
back, and I always used to find it weird that like, your senior year is the best year of your life. It's like, well, what do I have to look forward to?
right, exactly,
Right? So
yeah.
it's that whole thing. I mean, sometimes it just takes a while, but I think the whole thing is you just got to be tenacious and you got to have that idea that you just don't quit. I mean, I'm going to find what I'm supposed to be here for, and it may take a while, it may take decades.
Well, and in my case, and I think it's the case with a lot of people, when you find what you were built to do, you'll also find all those experiences that led up to that um, lent themselves to that. In other
Totally.
words, of course, you could see where like being in communications, radio and TV could help being a preacher,
Yeah.
with communicating. But um, so many of the things I did. I was a general manager of a radio station for several years, and I had employees, and in radio you have the artsy side of the on-air talents, and they're kind of out there. But then you have the money-driven salespeople, because that's how radio stations make their money, and you
Yeah.
have to manage these two groups of people who are vastly different.
Yeah.
And so that was very helpful in church life, because you're bringing people together in a group that are vastly different, and
Yeah.
and how do we get along. So again, I would encourage people who feel like maybe they haven't found their niche. It's like, well, you will find it, and you will find that everything you've done will help you carry that out.
For sure. So at the end of the day, Mike, everyone has a perception of you, family, friends, your congregation, everyone that knows you, but you run the show. What's your perception of you? Who do you think you are?
Hmm. But you asked great questions.
Yeah. Thanks.
I Well, my significance is in being a son of God. Um, and I know that sounds cliche, um, and it's biblical, but I, even for several years as a pastor, if people would say, "Do you know that you're a son of God?" Like, yeah, I know that. I mean, I knew it in my head, but I didn't know it in my knower.
Yeah.
Uh, deep within me. And honestly, it wasn't until probably 10 years ago when that really sunk in. God's love for me. I mean, I knew that in my head since I was 4 years old, but to know it in my heart, to know it in my knower, really changed my life. And that's where I was on a search for significance. That's one reason why I did a lot of different things in my life, was trying to find significance. And when I found my significance in God, then I didn't have to search anymore.
Yeah.
And so I can enjoy things more and do those, but I don't have to find my significance in that. And so that's been a real um, rest for me. but also fulfilling. So I guess who am I? Um, I'm I'm a son of God that I that I know that in my knower. Um, and I'm just glad that to be able to be used for what He wants to do. And I feel like I feel like I want to be humble, and I think I am. I think I have hopefully a proper humility, but I also have this huge confidence. And so I feel like God has made me confidently humble. I
Yeah,
don't know if that makes sense.
sure.
And I think that's such a great place to be
Yeah,
because, so many people just charge ahead of their abilities and they're not humble and they make a mess. And other people try to stay so humble. It's really a false humility that they never get anything done.
yeah.
So,
Yeah, I totally get it. It's kind of like food. Like people that don't eat good foods never feel full or satisfied. It's like you got to
right.
eat the right thing, you know?
Right.
And if you
Yeah.
do, you're in good shape.
Yes.
So, Mike, if anyone wants to reach out, they want to learn more about you, your writing, anything, any of the great work that you're doing, where can they go? Where's the best place?
Yeah, my website is Mota Ministries, MOTA, motaministries.com. Uh, Mota stands for ministry one to another because I
Okay.
know it's important. One of the things I do as a pastor is teach people how to minister to others because we're all called to be ministers. So motaministries.com. I've written a couple books. One just came out, Breaking Up with the Enemy, how to defeat the devil's deceit and reclaim peace, hope, and joy. It's helping a lot of people. I've gotten tons of good feedback from that. And so, but the links to those books, and I have a lot of free courses and some free audio books and some blogs, all at motaministries.com.
Excellent. Mike, this has been wonderful. Thank you, sir. Thank you for your story. Thank you for your time. Been refreshing.
It's been a privilege and great to visit with you, Joe.
Great to talk to you. Thank you, sir. Take care. Send my love to Montana, and we're looking for a three-peat. I went to training camp last week. There was electricity in the air. I have my camera the whole time on Kelsey and Mahomes. I always go during the first part of the camp, but I was on the last day this year, and it was like an hour long. It was Military Appreciation Day, and you could just feel it in the air. So we'll keep our fingers crossed.
Go Chiefs.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, sir.
Thanks, Joe.
Take care. See ya.